The night was heavy with the scent of dust and smoke, the kind that only rolled over the plains when a storm had just passed and the fires of men still burned nearby, and in that tense silence broken only by the rattling of barn doors in the wind, the rancher found himself gripping a knife so tightly his knuckles whitened, the steel glinting beneath the weak glow of a lantern swinging overhead. His name was Caleb Ward, a man known across the county as someone of strength, silence, and a stubborn will that no outlaw nor cattle thief had ever broken. Yet in that moment, staring at the figure crouched in the shadows of his barn, he felt something ripple through him that he could not explain. She was shivering, her dress torn, her face streaked with grime, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Save me, please." And Caleb's body locked in place, his instincts colliding between the urge to strike and the deep stirring in his heart that this broken figure was not his enemy, but someone who had clawed her way to his doorstep in desperate need. He had raised the knife out of habit, a rancher's defense against rustlers or coyotes lurking too close to his herd. But as the weak light revealed her eyes, wide, shimmering with terror, pleading as if every ounce of her life depended on his mercy, his hand shook, and for the first time in years Caleb Ward stumbled back in horror, dropping the blade to the wooden floor with a clatter that echoed through the empty barn. She collapsed forward, her hands trembling as she pressed them to the dirt, whispering again, softer this time, "Please, don't hurt me." And Caleb, still reeling, crouched down, unsure whether to reach for her or keep his distance. Because something about the way she had appeared here, barefoot and bloodied, seemed both dangerous and divine, as if fate itself had guided her to his land. He finally managed to steady his voice, rough but not unkind, and asked, "Who are you? What happened to you?" But she only shook her head, strands of hair falling across her face, tears streaking down her cheeks, and whispered, "They'll find me. They'll kill me if you send me away," before her strength gave out and she slumped into unconsciousness. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms cradling her fragile frame, and he felt the weight of her fear like a brand searing into his chest, a weight he could not ignore. He carried her into the ranch house, the old wooden, doctor creaking as he kicked it open, laying her gently on the sofa by the fire, his mind racing with questions, but his heart already bound by a sense of duty he had not felt in years. As the firelight danced across her pale face, he saw the bruises, the scratches, the unmistakable signs of someone hunted, and anger flared in him, not at her, but at whoever had done this, whoever had driven this woman to the point of collapsing at his door. He poured a basin of water, tore a strip from an old shirt, and carefully wiped the dirt from her face, muttering under his breath about the madness of the world, and when she stirred at his touch, her eyes fluttering open just enough to catch his, he felt something grip his soul tighter than fear, compassion, fierce and unyielding, the kind that made men do things they never thought themselves capable of. She whispered, barely audible, "Thank you, stranger." And Caleb shook his head, saying softly, "No, stranger. My name's Caleb Ward. You're safe here." The word safe felt foreign, heavy, because he wasn't even sure if it was true, if men were chasing her, if danger lurked just outside his fences, then no place was truly safe. But he meant it, every syllable, with a determination that could not be broken. The hours dragged on through the night, and though exhaustion pulled at him, Caleb sat near the fire with his rifle propped at his side, watching over her like a sentinel, listening for every creak of wood and howl of wind, knowing deep in his bones that something had shifted in his life forever. He remembered the way his hand had trembled when he raised that knife, the horror of almost striking someone who wasn't his enemy, but a woman begging for salvation, and he vowed silently that no matter who she was, no matter what storm she had fled, he would not let harm come to her again. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and silent, but Caleb knew the quiet was temporary, a fragile shell before the storm broke again, and as dawn painted the horizon with streaks of gold, he whispered to the sleeping woman, as much a promise, to himself as to her, "Whoever you're running from, they'll have to go through me first." He didn't know her story yet, didn't know her name, didn't know why fate had put her in his barn, but he knew this. She had begged him to save her, and he had stumbled back in horror at the thought of harming her, which meant she had already carved her way into his heart, and nothing in this wide, cruel land would ever be the same again. The morning sun spilled across the plains like molten gold, warming the chill from the long night, and Caleb Ward stood on his porch, his hat low, over his eyes, scanning the horizon with the instinct of a man who had lived too long on the edge of danger to ignore the weight of silence. Behind him, inside the house, the woman he had saved stirred softly, her presence filling the cabin with a strange new energy that both unsettled and steadied him. He had promised himself that he wouldn't ask too many questions until she was strong enough to answer, but the curiosity gnawed at him all the same. Who was she? Who had driven her here in such desperation? And why did her broken plea, "Save me, please," echo in his chest like a vow he could never escape? When he finally stepped back inside, she was awake, sitting up on the sofa, her eyes glassy but alive, her hands clutching the edge of the blanket he had thrown over her. For a long moment, neither spoke, only the crackling of the fire filling the silence until Caleb broke it with his steady, gravelly voice. "You're safe here. No one knows this land better than me. Whoever you're running from, they won't find you easy." She looked at him, her lips trembling as if she wanted to believe but couldn't quite bring herself to, and finally, with a breath that shivered like a leaf in the wind, she whispered, "My name is Eliza." Caleb nodded once, slow and firm, repeating it quietly to make it real. Eliza. She seemed surprised he didn't push further, didn't demand her story outright, but instead walked to the stove to brew coffee, the smell rising rich and sharp through the room. That simple act, his patience, made her tears well again, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked like glass. "They wanted to sell me." Caleb's hands froze over the coffee pot, his jaw tightening as he turned to her, eyes narrowing with a rage he rarely let himself feel. "Who?" he asked, his tone low, dangerous, but she shook her head, pressing her face into her hands, unable to utter their names. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and crouched before her, his calloused hand hovering near hers but not touching, as if waiting for her permission. "You don't have to tell me now. But hear this, Eliza. You're not theirs. Not now. Not ever again." The firmness in his voice struck something inside her, something that had been crushed under weeks of terror, and for the first time in months, she let herself believe she might survive. The days that followed were a strange rhythm of silence and small steps. Eliza helped with chores when she could, feeding the chickens, mending clothes, sweeping the porch, but her eyes never stopped darting to the tree line, as if shadows still followed her. Caleb pretended not to notice her fear, but he was always watchful, his rifle never far, his body a shield she didn't realize was already protecting her. Slowly, the ranch that had once felt like nothing more than wood and stone began to feel different. At night, by the fire, Caleb found himself talking about the land, about the cattle, about the storms that swept through the plains, and though Eliza said little, she listened with an intensity that made him feel heard in ways he had never been. She had begged him to save her, but she had no idea she was saving him too, dragging him out of the silence of a life lived only for survival and back into the world of feeling. One evening, when the sun was bleeding orange over the horizon, Eliza finally told him everything. The men who had taken her from a traveling caravan, the nights locked away in a cabin where deals were whispered about her like she was cattle for trade, the daring escape she had made in the chaos of a storm that had swept across the plains. She had run until her feet bled, until she thought she would collapse and never rise again, and then she saw the light of his barn and thought it was heaven itself. Caleb listened without interrupting, his fists clenched, his heart pounding with fury, and when she finished, she looked at him as if waiting for him to recoil, to see her as ruined, tainted. Instead, he said only, "You're alive. That's what matters. And if they come looking, they'll regret ever stepping foot on my land." She stared at him, stunned, and for the first time, a small, fragile smile broke across her lips. That night, sleep came easier, and when Caleb checked on her before heading to his room, he found her murmuring in her dreams, her hand clutching the blanket like a lifeline, and though he had never prayed much, he whispered a silent promise to whatever. God might be listening that she would never again face the world alone. But fate has a cruel way of testing promises, and it wasn't long before the peace shattered. A week later, Caleb's cattle stirred uneasily, and the dogs barked deep into the night. Caleb grabbed his rifle, stepping out into the darkness, and saw the faint glimmer of lanterns moving along the ridge.